Agile Manifesto is a foundational concept around the Agile, and further, it's a landmark artifact which has changed the entire landscape of the project management, especially the projects that belongs to the software development industry. Back in the decades of 1990s, waterfall was the only prevailing approach used to manage all kinds of projects. But with waterfall, the results were too slow because with the waterfall approach, the entire software was planned up front and delivered at the end of the project. Therefore, a group of 17 thought tanks from the software development industry, they sit together to create another parallel framework that can actually understand the requirements and then give a solution that can meet the current and future needs of the software development industry and its products. So as a result, in the year 2001, they created and agreed upon a framework which is known as the Agile Manifesto in the modern age. So the Agile Manifesto has four foundational values and 12 guided principles. And in this video, I'm going to cover those 12 principles in detail. So for the PMI ACP aspirant, this video is again going to be very important to understand the foundational concepts around Agiles and its foundations. So without any delay, let's just get started. If you are onto the road of learning the well-famed 12 Agile principles that belong to the Agile Manifesto, it's worth mentioning here that before understanding these 12 well-famed Agile principles, one should learn the four foundational values and the historic background of the Agile Manifesto. And the good part is that I've already covered the Agile Manifesto historical background and the four foundational values of that Agile Manifesto in my previous video. So before actually watching this video and understanding the 12 principles, I'll still insist you to watch my previous video so that you can have a better understanding of these 12 principles. So link of my previous video is also mentioned in the link description. So if you've already familiar about the four foundational values, then you can just continue with from this video. As I covered in my previous video that the Agile Manifesto has four foundational values and it is guided by 12 principles. So these 12 principles holds a controlling authority for the Agile methodologies and practices that are widely used as part of the Agile Manifesto. Further to that, these principles actually represents a culture in which change is welcomed, which means the change is usually a pivotal part of agile projects because change can come at any point in time or change can come at any phase in the project, especially for the agile projects. And in agile projects, customers are not just managed, but they are usually engaged at each and every phase and every point of the project, and then the customer satisfaction becomes the utmost priority because the agile projects they usually harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. Let's now look into the first principle of the Agile Manifesto. And the first principle of the Agile Manifesto says that our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. In agile projects, we usually create a product on the expense of the customer. And the customer actually doesn't want the product to be released late because it will actually not satisfy the customer. So the customer definitely wants the product to be released as soon as possible. So in agile projects, what we do that at the end of the each iteration, we produce some increment. So an increment is something that the customer can use and return on investment can be made. So that increment doesn't represent the entire project, but actually a part of it, which is valuable to the customer and the project as well. So that's the reason that the first principle of the Agile Manifesto says that the customer satisfaction and the delivery of a continuous uh, and the continuous delivery of valuable software is the utmost priority in agile projects. The second principle of the Agile Manifesto says that welcome changing requirements even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. This means that in a world that is constantly changing at a rapid pace, so nobody can actually predict what the requirements of a piece of software will be. Yet, businesses don't like surprises. So, but what they even look like is not wasting money on a product that is even not relevant. So, this means that if we actually welcome change, the software could provide the customer with a competitive advantage because it satisfies the current and the future needs of that software. The gist of this principle is that instead of trying to stop or slow down the change or actually panicking from the change, instead we should actually embrace it and use it to our customers' core competitive advantage. Let us now look at the third principle of the Agile Manifesto, which says deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to couple of months with a preference to the short time scale. So this principle actually seems like a repetition of a first principle of the Agile Manifesto in a way that the first principle points out that we should start delivering valuable software continuously to the customer. This principle goes a little bit more into detail about what delivering continuously actually means. So it recommends delivering a new version of your software within a shorter time scale. This means that smaller releases means fewer chances of bug getting through in the process. So more frequent releases also provide more moments of feedback from the client. In a nutshell, if you only get feedback about all your changes after several months, you'll have much more work that can accommodate any remarks. So we this also means that if you divide your working software into more manageable chunks, so it will easier for you to deliver that smaller chunk of the work to the customer, and furthermore it will substantially increase the value of the product. The next principle of the Agile Manifesto, which is the fourth principle, it is business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. This is pretty straightforward because if the business people and developers they work together daily throughout the project, so it'll definitely help them in understanding the product and project requirements in a better sense. Furthermore, the both of them will be benefited because it will help them in increasing their productivity, and furthermore it will also increase the value of the project because now people from different walk of lives they sit together and they are now working together to make a better product. So business people and developers remember that they must sit together daily throughout the project as part of the Agile Manifesto, and this is the fourth principle of the Agile Manifesto. So let's look at now the fifth principle of the Agile Manifesto, which says build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. Again, this is very pretty straightforward because an agile team is mature and responsible enough to produce a quality product, and this certainly requires an amount of trust. But if you can't trust your developers, then why you actually hired them in the first place? With the correct coaching, environment, and tools, motivated developers will feel enabled to do their work professionally. because an agile team should look like a one cohesive team who has just one goal, and the goal is to produce a valuable software so that the customer can ultimately be satisfied. In a nutshell, if you build a project around people that are not motivated or have been demotivated due to lack of trust or support, your project isn't likely to be succeeded. So if you want your project to be succeeded, you must have a motivated individuals, and you give them the environment and support them so that they can get their job done. And this is the fifth principle of the Agile Manifesto. The sixth principle of the Agile Manifesto is the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face to face conversation. So, if you realize that technology has increased the number of ways in which humans can actually communicate, but none of these are as good as face to face communication, because our brain actually interprets all kind of a signals, not just the sound waves of our voices. So facial expression and body language, they matter significantly in a face-to-face communication, because in the modern age, some the tools like Microsoft Teams, Slack, Skype, Hangout, Zoom, and there are many more that has made virtual teams, teams working in different zones, in a different geographic regions with different culture, different norms. But these tools have actually made the communication more easier and effortlessly. But they can never be 100% real like face to face communication, because the face to face communication carries the highest bandwidth of all the communications. So that's the reason the utmost emphasis as part of the Agile Manifesto is on face to face communication, because the most effective and efficient method will always remain a face to face communication. The seventh principle of the Agile Manifesto is working software is the primary measure of the progress. So, if you remember that we have four foundational values of the Agile Manifesto, and the second value of the Agile Manifesto says working software over comprehensive documentation. So, what exactly the working software is? So, again, let me just explain the working software, which I have already explained in my previous video, which I actually referred in the start of this video. So, working software is actually a smaller increment, a smaller chunk of the product you produce at the end of each iteration in the agile projects, that actually doesn't represent the entire project, but as part of the project that add values to the product and ultimately satisfy the customer and bring some ROI, which is return on investment. So in agile projects, do remember that working software is actually the primary measure of the progress. It's not the documentation, because the documentation is a waste. So documentation is only needed as the last responsible moment, which means that documentation is only needed when document is only provided when the documentation becomes mandatory. So documentation is a waste, because nobody has a time to read a comprehensive documentation, but and it adds no value. Instead, a working software that actually represents the projects not from its entirety but a smaller portion of it actually becomes the prime measure of the project progress in agile projects. And this is the seventh principle of the Agile Manifesto. So let's just look at the next principle, which is the eighth principle of the Agile Manifesto, which is agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. So this means that a repeatable and iterative pattern should be established where sustainable development of the project take place at a constant rate. This prevents the team members from being overwhelmed and overstressed while the project keeps on progressing at an acceptable rate. So, the gist of this whole principle is to try to maintain a constant pace of development indefinitely. The ninth and another important principle of the Agile Manifesto is continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility, which is certainly true because most of the times businesses and organizations they prefer time to market over good technical design, and in all fairness they actually can't be blamed. The end user doesn't care about the technical excellence and it doesn't create income for the business, which is in most of the cases it's true. But if the team actually neglects a good technical design for so long, their speed and time to market will slow down, and this will actually decrease the agility. And furthermore, their ability to change the product as a reaction to a changing market will actually going to diminish. So they are losing their agility. So the prime focus, and that's the reason the prime focus is to always have a continuous attention to technical excellence, because the technical excellence will always lead to increase and enhance the agility of the team. Let's now look at the 10th principle of the Agile Manifesto, which says simplicity is the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. So, simplicity is something that is easier to use and it's usually hard to achieve. So, if your solution is simple, then for the end users, it's going to be an easier thing to use. But to achieve it, it's a hard thing to accomplish. So, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done can be achieved through many ways. So let's see that you have some procedures or you have some processes that are no longer relevant to your project. You can always remove them in order to improve. Um, there could be another example, like if you have libraries available with you, so you can use existing libraries rather than you are creating new libraries from the scratch, because it's going to cost more money and more time. And another way you can improve in your project is that you can automate all the manual work. So all these actions will help you in improving and reaching towards the simplicity, so that you can add more value towards the product. So remember that the Agile Manifesto, the 10th principle is simplicity, and simplicity is actually the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, and that is very essential. The 11th principle of the Agile Manifesto is the best architectures, requirements, and design, they always emerge from self organizing teams. So, if you closely look at this principle, you'll get to know that this principle is actually the combination of the other principles we have already discussed. So, if you remember that the business developers and the business people and developer, they must sit together daily throughout the project to maximize their productivity and to understand the requirements in order to make the product even better. And then we have another principle which says that the working software is the prime measure of the product rather than theoretical models or documentation. And then we had another principle which says that the product should be built around motivated individuals. Then we should have teams producing quality software without too much control from the above. Agile Manifesto promotes self organizing, self managing, and self directing teams. So, self organizing teams, they can meet, they are the teams they organize themselves without having any control from the above. And self-directing teams, which self-directing and self-managing teams means that they make their local decisions without having any control from the above. So which items to attack for the current iteration. So remember that the Agile Manifesto, they do promote self-organizing and self-managing team. And finally, the last principle of the Agile Manifesto says that at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. So, this is perhaps the time when the entire team self actualize and internalize and look at the work they delivered and find out ways to improve for the next iterations. So, at regular intervals, self organizing teams should take the time to look at the way they work and adjust accordingly and make their work even better. No team actually runs perfectly. A mature agile team can identify with respect to each other and then take action to improve the process. This is a very important principle and it will remain intact and it will always matter. It's what's make individuals, teams and the business successful by not accepting the status quo but always looking improve the situation as much as they can. And that's the gist of this whole principle, that regular intervals team is having a chance to reflect on how to become more effective and productive and then adjust its behavior accordingly so that the project can be benefited. So with the last principle of the Agile Manifesto, we have now reached to the end of this video, and I'm really hoping that this video has actually equipped you with the 12 agile principles and the true motivation behind that. But if you still have any questions, so please post me on the video comment section and I'll individually get back to you with the best of my knowledge. Thank you for watching the video. Bye bye.